What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York, calling from the quarantine zone again, and this time we are here with Stevic of 12 Foot Ninja. Thanks for being here today, man. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. Thank you for giving us a brand new 12 Foot Ninja to wait out these dire times with. We got Vengeance coming out. Being that it's been 5 years since the release of Outlier, your last full length album, did you just consider this just a continuation of Outlier, or is Vengeance almost meant to be like a new start for 12 Foot Ninja in a way?
It's yeah, I think it's quite, I mean, each album's pretty different to the previous the previous album. So yeah, it's probably a fresh, we shook the Etch a Sketch. This is a new thing.
Yeah, I like that analogy, shook the Etch a Sketch.
Yeah, it's I use that one a lot. Sort of I guess is a good way to typify the temporary nature of things.
Yeah, definitely. Now, 12 Foot Ninja's music I've always considered to be fairly experimental and having many different sounds and many different, styles incorporated into it. So it's fair to say with Vengeance, Start the Fire, Long Way Home, and Over and Out, the three singles you release are not a representation of the entirety of Vengeance, right? There's a lot more to be discovered.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that really follows much similarities apart from there's a bit of an 80s thread throughout, mixed with kind of the modern metal um model like metal genre, I suppose, or heavy genre, and of course, Nick's vocals and the lyrical approach is probably the stable aspect of the album. But yeah, each track is pretty much a little island onto itself. Hopefully that makes for an interesting album. Yeah, or people might get pissed off. I don't know.
Well, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. If your album's very consistent,
Exactly.
people will criticize you for being repetitive. If it's very experimental, people will criticize you for being directionless and inconsistent. So in the end, you just have to go with your gut instinct.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of ultimately what we just, what we realize, that we got to do that. Like, we can't sort of try and anticipate what we think people want. We just got to do what we like, and hopefully the planets align.
Definitely. Now, do you ever enter like a songwriting process with a preconceived idea of what you want it to sound like, or is there a lot of like improvising involved, or is it like a very conscious effort?
It's never really one thing. I think with this album, and I mean, I wish I could answer that question in a more concise way, but it really varies. It varies track to track. Like we tend to tackle things kind of differently each time. There are some recurrent kind of processes I think we use, and for this album, we definitely paid a lot of attention to what we call the acoustic guitar test. Like, if it can be stripped back to an acoustic guitar melody and lyric, does it hold its own as a song? By the traditional concept of what a song is, and then the production and the genre exploration is really the next level out from the essential, which is the song.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'm making a distinction in a lot of interviews between songs and like riff porn,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It's hard because everything's so subjective. I think Frank Zappa said it best, like, talking about music's like dancing about architecture.
Yeah. Well,
It's really hard to do.
I've always said it's like listening to porn on the radio.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yep.
That would be interesting though. It'd be like a really bad serial. Like, I'd be more interested in the setup. Like, how are you gonna pay me? Like, and they'd be like, I don't have any money. Well, you're gonna have to pay. Well, maybe we could work something out.
Wow. Man, all these analogies.
What do you mean?
All these analogies. I'm officially going to name this episode of Heavy New York Etch a Sketches, Architecture, and Pornography. That's the name of this episode right here.
Perfect, mate.
Yep.
It sounds like you could do it, like, you could get one of those stick logos, that looks like a pile of sticks, like the really, what's that, black metal style kind of
Yeah.
That would be cool.
The unreadable logos. Well, hey,
Yeah.
maybe that's the best way to describe your music since it moves in multiple directions. You have stuff that's like porn. You have stuff that's which has which there's a lot of variety there. You have stuff that's very concise like architecture, and then you have the Etch a Sketch where you could just erase everything. So you and I might be onto something here.
Yeah, I think that's poetry. You've just brought that. That's a beautiful sort of picture that you've brought there. I'm all for it, mate.
Awesome, thank you. I'm having some artistic inspiration right now. We're gonna have to stay in touch after this interview.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. But
For sure.
you do bring up a valid point though, where you mentioned like riff porn, because to me, like, I do you think that the term riff is almost kind of like or over glorified in a way, where like people put such a focus on riffs that they lose, like the idea of what a full song should sound like.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a lot of it's like we call it the dark side of the force, because we felt this kind of omniscient pressure to like create really clever shit, and then we're like, hang on, this is actually too cognitive. Like it's too much chin stroking, like looking at an Escher staircase, as opposed to kind of emotion and being evocative. And I think really we identified like we want people to feel songs and go, I really understand, like that really, I felt that, as opposed to, wow, that's really hard to play on guitar.
Yeah. It's all cool like in progressive metal or something like that, or even like speed metal, to have like a solo that's 17 and a half minutes long. But like I think for 12 Foot Ninja, I mean, like you have such like so many different vibes, and I think you capture a moment. So like, and so if you like work on something for a long time, you almost kind of like lose the emotional spark or that moment that you were trying to convey, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not, by the way, casting any shade on artists that do that, and technical proficiency or whatever is their primary objective. I've got a burp working its way. That's why I'm talking weird. Yeah, it's when it's sort of sitting in your throat, and then it's gone. It's
called the turtle head.
So yeah, I think and I mean, I love some of that stuff, but I find it's not what floats my boat to create. Like I sort of, it's not really, I don't know. Like I like thinking about the conversation people have after they come to a show, after they watch a video, after they listen to music. What are the kind of things I hope that they say? I hope that they talk about the ideas and the feelings of, as opposed to the technical shit. Like and it's funny that, I heard myself say this at a guitar clinic. It's like when you listen to music through the prism of how difficult it is, you miss out on all this kind of simplicity that really is quite special. Like, you sort of write off music based on its technical standard, as opposed to allow yourself to be open to, what's going on. Like Ben Harper is an American artist. He's got a song called Another Lonely Day. It's got 4 chords in it, but it's a great song.
Yeah, well, look at Ramones. I mean, like people think like when you realize that Ramones consists of just basic power chords, but then you look at the overall structure and you realize it's more complex than you think. Or even like look back to a lot of the early heavy metal artists. I mean, a lot of them were just taking ZZ Top riffs and playing them very, very fast. So I think so when you boil
well, I mean,
down,
the origin of if you go back to the genesis of metal, I mean, it had a lot of soul. Like there was a lot of point, and I think it's like the Baroque period or the 60s, where experimenting kind of and virtuosity takes the spotlight over the, composition or the transmission of a story, so it's, and I'm not, when I say this, I'm not pontificating from a, like this is how it should be. It's just a choice. Like we just wanted to kind of go, all right, we obviously do these, we see genre as a dynamic as opposed to a rules that you have to stick to. But could we, also have meaning there for people who are looking for that? And that's what we hoped that, we hoped to have done. And there's a lot of kind of social commentary on this album, but there's also moments where it's just, more heartfelt. And hopefully people can tell when that's happening. So it's been fascinating, like getting reviews back, you know, and seeing just the interpretations of different people. Like it's already been quite kind of polarizing, which is exactly where we want to be.
And how it should be too. I think you create art that does what it's initially supposed to do, and I'm talking musical or visual or film or anything. It conveys discussion, and I mean the fact is that I can't figure out a place where to put 12-foot Ninja on the periodic table of heavy metal subgenres. So,
well, that is good to me. I mean, it makes things lonely a little bit, but yeah, I mean, we don't know what to call it either.
Yeah.
Like, so, you know, the best we came up with was heavy fusion, but even, you know, that sounds quite pretentious.
Yeah, but you sound nothing like Candiria, and you sound nothing like Dillinger Escape Plan. So, like,
yeah.
So
I don't know, man. If someone comes up with something, someone said whatever we want core, which I kind of like that. There's been some funny ideas, you know. A lot of the times we get compared to smoothies, you know, like or pizzas, you know, food that has multiple foods to make it. We're like a food Voltron.
Definitely. When it comes to like the songwriting process, do you find it easier for your for your guitar playing to maybe come up with ideas when you're more like alone and like in isolation and there's nothing in between, you know, you and the instrument, or do you prefer to maybe write music in the company of your fellow bandmates?
No, everything we do is in isolation. Like, and that was before isolation was forced upon us. But yeah, I don't know. It's just always been a bit of a solitary process. And I think the principle behind that is everyone has to feel satisfied that their ideas have been realized. Like, if you have an idea, it's like you've got to be like, this is my idea. And then you've got to be satisfied that whatever you show is reflective of your idea. I think it's difficult when you're jamming with people. You're relying on their interpretation of what you're trying to go for, and you haven't had the opportunity to refine that yourself.
Yeah.
So that, I think, you know, to create some kind of democracy in writing, the best way is to give people the space to realize their ideas. And then, you know, they've been through the refinement process. They back what they present. And then they've also got the chance to abort, like, and go, you know, I worked on that, and actually don't worry about it. Because early on, like, you know, we did get together and there was like a bunch of dudes sitting on a couch and what if it did this? What would that sound like? You know, what if we, you know, and it's like, man, that's pretty, everyone who wanted, if everyone wants to hear their ideas in real time, it gets bloody time consuming.
And overwhelming.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And often you might kill something that with a bit of nurturing could have been good.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Like, there's such a thing as over being too careful with your art. You need to let your art breathe. It's life in itself that you create, and when you bring it out into the world, you're just its humble guide.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, there's a professor at Berkeley who says it beautifully. He's like, he's a songwriting professor. He says, you've got to give yourself permission to be shit, because shit is the best fertilizer.
Wow. I would tattoo
and it's
that.
Like,
I might tattoo that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good thing, because people, I think, with a lot of things, man, like it, not just music, like, and I think social media has probably exacerbated this problem. Like, they're judging themselves on perfection. That's their metric, you know? Well, like even like starting life where your parents end their life, like that kind of pressure and stuff. It's like, you got to be cool to be shit.
Yeah.
Like,
well, perfection is a man-made concept, and being that man are what we create, you know, and we are in fact flawed, so the concept of perfection is going to be flawed.
Yeah. Well, there's a book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and the author, I think he was schizophrenic, and he just sat on a park bench for a year or something, contemplating life. And he had an interesting theory that quality is defined by how much of yourself you see reflected in what you're observing, which is an interesting concept, because it's difficult to appreciate what you define as quality if you don't relate to it on some sort of personal level, or, you know, it doesn't kind of have an ego
Yeah.
kind of response.
That's kind of dangerous, though. If you think it's almost kind of like thinking that everything revolves around you, and then you end up.
Well, I think that might be his point.
Yeah, I think that might have
There's
been
a
the
lot of
birth of
people
narcissism right there.
yeah, there's a lot of people walking around. There's the center of the universe, you know.
Yeah.
And it's hard to yeah, we could go deep on that.
Yeah. I promised your publicist I'd only it'd only be 20 minutes, so and I have two more questions.
That's all right. Go for it, man.
Yeah.
Let's make it. We'll make it work.
Yeah, yeah. But the one question I did want to ask you is that there is a lot to celebrate for 12 Foot Ninja, as Silent Machine, the debut album, is hitting 10 years old next year. And I kind of wanted to turn back the clock a little bit. We talked about the future of 12 Foot Ninja. I kind of wanted to turn back the clock, being that this was the debut album. And I know you've had like EPs such as New Dawn and Smoke Bomb, but like, what was the sort of thought process with the debut full-length album, and if that maybe influenced how you would later write Outlier and eventually Vengeance?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I think around that time, I know, speaking on my own, from my own perspective, I started to doubt the format of the album. So yeah, Outlier was a reluctant, like, you know, I've been reluctantly doing these albums because I just don't think albums are where it's at. You know, I don't think people, I mean, I know a lot of our fans, and I'm extremely grateful for this. They will sit there and listen to a whole album and like absorb it, but it's just, yeah, the world changed and consumer behavior's changed and the value of music's changed so much that an album is almost like, you know, it's the squeeze isn't worth the juice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of, music's become paradoxically priceless and worthless at the same time. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but the album format is definitely something that I reluctantly do. And it's just really, we keep doing it because the industry in a lot of regards still kind of needs that format. But I think the fans, they would prefer single tracks in more frequent succession, you know, like, than holding off and doing this kind of little opus explosion.
They'll bitch about it the second that becomes a way of life, because they're going to want more as soon as they play the first song to death for a week. So
yeah, and I mean, like, I've been joking with Ro, the guitarist. It's like, you know, today this thing is out, and it's like, it's been so long in the making. And he goes, yeah, people are probably going to listen to it on the way to work and go, oh yeah.
Well, that's how you know you did something right. That's the way. That's the way, man. And you know what? Fuck the people saying let's go back to the old days, because if you had those platforms, if you had a seat, like if you were walking around with a pair of AirPods back in the freaking 20th century, or back in the 19 roaring 20s, listening to Andrew's Sister, it would have been the same way on the way to the pub. Maybe you'd be a little drunker on the way to work, but that's the only difference. So like, yeah. So
well, that's the thing. Like, music, I think it's all morphing. You know, like, it's all changed, and you know, it's not a bad thing.
It's the only constant in the world.
In fact, it's kind of cool. Like, you just, but yeah, I think there's a little. I don't think a lot of the aspects of the music industry, the industry side, aren't necessarily being calibrated by what the consumers are doing. I think the consumers are always a step ahead in terms of, you know, like, what's going on. But that's a debate. You know, it's debatable. So, but for me, like, I think the future, like what SoundCloud and Deezer in particular are doing with streaming, is really good. Yeah. And I hope that some of the bigger players follow suit. And, you know, there's hope. Like, I think COVID's been interesting. Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the UK with government level, like, observation of, like, what are we doing for the arts that have just been decimated by this crazy virus, you know, like, yeah. So, man, it's. I feel like generally everything's in a bit of a state of flux at the moment. Like, the pendulum is really swinging hard, like, either way, and we're going to land somewhere new.
Yeah. And we got to look forward to it and embrace it.
Yeah.
And the final question I wanted to ask you is I've interviewed so many bands from Australia at this point. Now, I've been quoted saying that I've always said that metalcore is Britain's greatest export because look at the UK, look at Massachusetts, and look at Australia with all the great metalcore bands. I think it has to do with I think it has some part of history in British imperialism. Maybe, but and I have a feeling that the next metalcore capital is going to be either India or South Africa. But
You could be right. I mean, when we were in India, there was a real bustling, emergent scene, and Nepal, like in these places, had like especially Nepal, they were singing quite a lot of, it was angsty kind of. It was rebelling against oppressive systems, and there was a unity through metal. It was kind of like it was kind of nice to see because it was like this sort of brother and sisterhood like founded in metal that was really nice. It was.
You played a show in Nepal.
It wasn't like, hey,
you played a show
we headlined a festival in Nepal.
Was it on Mount Everest?
Like, no, I don't know where it was. It's a silence festival in Kathmandu, and it was crazy. But yeah, we were like didn't know what to expect. We'd never been there before. We were hanging out in monkey temples and shit, and then we played this festival, and I just remember there was this really like tangible unity with the fans at that festival. It was really like together, and it kind of reminded me of that's what really it should be about. Anyway, sorry man, I went on a tangent.
No,
but yeah,
it's all good. I just wanted to know, like, in the world of Australian metal, like, because there's so many great bands and a great musical history from Australia. I'm just wondering how it was in maybe the sort of scene that you're in. And to be fair, I think for a band from Australia, it's got to be really hard to like. I've seen so many great bands, and a lot of them coming here, and some of these bands weren't like ginormous. Like I saw Neobliviscaris here. I mean, they sometimes play like a good 500 cap room, but that's not AC/DC. And then like Polaris has come here quite a handful of times now. Like I would thought that it would be much harder because of how isolated Australia already is and everything, but like that. But how is sort of like the scene, and how was it sort of getting your foot in the door around there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the scene, I don't know, maybe I'm an introvert or something. I don't really feel part of a scene. Like if there's a scene, I often hear about it from a international perspective because there's a lot of bands, and all of those bands that you just mentioned, we respect. Like anyone who leaves Australia, we respect. Like doesn't matter whether we like, necessarily like their music or whatever, that's subjective, but anyone who can get it together enough to leave Australia is awesome, like from our point of view, because it's hard and you can't be lazy. You can't just fight your way through it. And that's probably why there's this sort of thing where if you get exposed to Australian bands, they've already had to run the gauntlet, like to even get in front of you, So, and I mean, Polaris are sick. They're a great band. Neobliviscaris, their stuff is fucking pretty wild as well. I mean, it's a different vibe, but I mean, there's King Parrot. Obviously, Parkway Drive is just smashing it.
Yeah.
There's a whole slew of, Diada's Murder is another really crazy band, and there's a lot of them are heavier. So yeah, I recognize if you call that. I mean, I think the scene it's heavy and it's Australian.
Yeah.
And it's hard. So the quality is got to be up there. They've got to be a proven concept to even consider leaving the country. So yeah. I don't know. Did that again?
Totally
answered.
Totally answered the question.
I wish I had a thing like, yeah, we all eat the liver of a kangaroo, and it gives us power to like. We do ceremonies and we meet up and we play video games and we discuss how we're going to attack the rest of the world. I wish that was the case, but not really.
The great music speaks for itself. But I want to thank you so much, Stevic, for your time today, and thank you so much for a great conversation. Everybody, we are here with 12 Foot Ninja. Be sure to check out their brand new album, Vengeance, coming out now. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.